Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Mondays with Mover. I'm Mover, and we've got an exciting interview series for you. Stormy Boudreaux is an incredible man who has done a lot in his career, and he sat down with me to do an interview pre-recorded. Ended up being about 3 hours. Probably too long for just one episode, so I'm going to break this up into multiple episodes encompassing his career, which is amazing. He started out in F-4s in Vietnam with a ton of combat missions and combat hours. He flew the T-38, he flew the T-33, and then most notably, he spent most of his career in the U-2 and the SR-71. So we've got a lot of great stories. I'm going to try to break it up by sections of his career because it's just awesome. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. He's got a great career and tells a great story. So thanks for watching. Here is part one of my interview with Stormy Boudreaux. I'm here with Stormy Boudreaux, a fellow Louisianian, which is awesome, Tulane graduate. Stormy, thank you for agreeing to be on the channel. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing just great. How you doing, Mover?
I'm just awesome. A pleasure to have you on the channel, and really looking forward to hearing. I love the wall back there. I mean, there's so much cool stuff. SR-71, U-2. God, we've got so much to talk about. How did you get in aviation? Like, what kicked off the bug? You grew up in Louisiana. What made you decide, hey, I want to fly?
My father-in-law to be, I was dating a young girl when I was in high school, whose father had been a B-26 pilot in World War II. And as his daughter and I were dating, and I started spending, and we dated through high school and college, and we got married the day I got commissioned from OTS. But all through that time, he was a very influential person in my life, and we would sometimes be in his garage working on his boat or doing something else, and we would either talk about aviation, talk about the theory of flight, talk about, well, is an elliptical wing on a Spitfire better than the wing that was on a P-51? And we just go through things like that. That was just, as you can imagine, it's kind of like having your own video of someone you're interviewing that you're just sitting there for years talking about aviation. And when I finally went down to our courthouse where the customs house, not courthouse, customs house, where all of the recruiters were at the foot of Canal Street. And I walked into the Navy area because my dad had been a Navy guy. He was a Pearl Harbor survivor.
Oh, wow.
And I took the test for them. Then I walked over and I took the test and stuff for the Marine Corps. Then I went into the Air Force and did that one and came back, and they gave me results later and they said, hey, you've done pretty well. We'd like you, and each one of them said, you scored highest on the navigator area. We'd like you to do that. And I came back and was talking to my father-in-law, to-be father-in-law, and he says, no. You don't want to be the navigator. You want to be the pilot.
Yeah.
and so it just kind of went from there. And I did a delayed enlistment right after my graduation from Tulane, and actually my junior year from Tulane. And then the next year, after graduation, in November, I went into OTS at Lackland Field, or Medina Annex at Lackland Field, and then got a T-38, or got a pilot training assignment to Vance Air Force Base, and that's where I went through pilot training.
Me too. That's awesome.
Oh, cool.
We're Tulane, so going back, what did you graduate? What did you study at Tulane? Was it anything aviation related, or?
Well, in a sense, I really liked biology and birds, and I was studying aviation, if you will. What is it about a bird that makes a bird capable of flying? Why? I mean, just because you throw feathers on a dog, you're not going to have the dog fly. What's different about, and the idea of them having lightened bones, hollow, almost trusses inside of the bones to lighten them up, getting rid of extra weight. I mean, very few people that know that sometimes the birds have evolved to where they only have one of things that we have two of, just to make them lighter. And the way their sternum turned out to where it could hold on to the breast meat that we love in a turkey is where the flight muscles come from, and the fingers on our hands evolve out into something that creates that, and it's just marvelous. And so I was studying that quite a bit. So it was kind of a backwards way of getting into aviation today.
Yeah, well, flying is flying. So, I mean, hey,
Yeah.
anybody loves aviation, you've got to love that. But so, you went to Vance Air Force Base, and what year is this, and kind of what's pilot training like at this time?
So December of '69, as I got to Vance, it snowed. First time I think I'd been in snow, 4 or 5 inches, and trying to deal with just getting to the base for my first day of assignment. To report in was kind of weird.
Did you fall a lot? Did you fall? Because I went to Vance. Yeah, same thing. Louisiana boy in the ice, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. You don't understand the coefficient of friction the way it applies there. So I just got to Vance and started going through the T-41 program out at Woodring Air Force Base, Woodring TVOR. I can still hear that identifier popping into my head. And T-37s, T-38s, the standard, so in December of '69, graduated in December of '70, class 7004.
At that time, everybody went through T-38. So what did you track select? And this is during the height of the Vietnam War. So what were you thinking?
So,
did you get what you wanted, or what were you wanting to do?
So the rules on how to select is still the same as today, I think, as they were then. They came down with, okay, this was your class can go to. And there was one F-106, and the number one guy in our class took it. And then the rest of the fighter type assignments were all F-4s. So we took F-4s, but this was in the day when you went into an F-4 out of pilot training, you went into the back seat of the F-4. And then from the back seat, you would work up to the front seat, and off you went. So I was like number 4, I think, in my class. The number 2 guy in my class was previously a NAV. Actually, he was the senior guy in our class. He was our class commander. He was a captain. And we all looked at him in awe because as a navigator and as an EWO, he had been on B-52s, but then got into 105s. And he came to us as being a bear in the F-105 Wild Weasel program.
Oh, wow.
But yes. And so
Wow.
he had lots of flying experience, being involved in stuff, flying. He had 100 missions over North Vietnam. And even he, who wanted to get back into fighters, ended up going into the backseat of the F-4 as his assignment.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh.
The Air Force was, didn't have enough navigators to fill the cockpits, because during my tenure in the F-4, I watched as the navigators stopped and the pilots stopped coming in, navigators started coming in, and towards the end of my tour in Vietnam, started to see young first lieutenants coming in to the front seat, whereas some of us who had spent 1,000 hours in the back seat were still in the back seat because they had gone through RTU to get in the front seat. We still had to do that if we wanted to get in the front seat.
Wow.
I was fortunate enough, I guess I did well enough that they gave me, I'd call it a local checkout, to where my Finney flight was in the front seat, but I had an IP flying in the back seat. But it was a combat sortie. We dropped bombs. It was not just a go fly around the flagpole as your penny flight. No, it was a counter. And so
Wow.
I think I think they threw me a bone. I think that was a good deal.
So how you went straight to the F4 backseat, and
Uh-huh.
how long were you there? You deployed in the backseat first time, or?
Well, yes. So at that time, in order to be trained as a backseater, I spent 4 or 5 months at Davis-Monthan learning radar and navigation, INS type stuff. And then from there, went to George Air Force Base, where the RTU class was. Kind of an interesting story. We finished on a Friday morning at Davis-Monthan, and I knew that I wanted to be in base housing at George. So as soon as I got out of the graduation ceremony, I jumped in my car and drove perhaps a little faster than the speed limit all the way on Interstate 10 into California, up I-15 to Apple Valley, and reported in so that I would get my name on the list, because it was a first come, first served type thing. Get my name on the list to have base housing at George. It turned out that I didn't get base housing immediately. And so we now had a new rule in our family. We had moved into this rented house, and the day, and I'm going to the base almost every day, all the time, even flying on the weekends. And so my wife is unpacking and setting up the house and stuff. So the day she unpacks the very last box, we get a call and say, "Hey, you got a base house." So now we have to pack it all up again.
No.
And so after that, we never unpacked the last box ever again. There was always one box we left sitting there, because
That's
if you
awesome.
unpack that box, something's going to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
that's just the way.
and so went to George, and aviation was just in my blood. I loved it. So when the weekends would come up, and this was during the summer of 70, there was always air shows, and we were flying E models at George, which were brand new. Very few airplanes. The E models were mostly deployed to Southeast Asia, or George had the only E models, I think, at least on the West Coast. Everybody else who was training, and they were phasing out the C, but some people were training in Cs. The people at Davis-Monthan were still training in Cs. There were some Ds going on, but this E model, oh, that was new. That was to catch me out. So I would volunteer to go on cross countries to go to air shows. So I spent a lot of time that next 4 or 5 months through RTU, gone on the weekends. Thinking back on it, I pity my poor wife. She was,
Yeah.
home alone. The wife needs to get an honor. Needs a medal to be able to put up with the shenanigans all of us gave them. It's pretty bad. But and I ended up being the I don't know what you call it, the honor graduate of the backseat class, backseaters of that. So then I got an assignment to Da Nang. And so by November of 70, I was en route from, it was really the longest trip of my life, because I'd gone back home to New Orleans wife had moved back. She was going to move back in with her family. I was going to be gone a full year. So I took I think it was a United flight from New Orleans to San Francisco, had about 14 hours layover in San Francisco. So I started in my uniform back in the 70s, walking all around San Francisco. Got told by one guy on one of the big hippie streets, he's looking at me as a young second lieutenant. You really shouldn't be walking around here in uniform. This was the days when people were protesting people being in the military. But later on that night, I walked all around San Francisco, caught cable cars and did stuff that, just crammed everything in that. Caught the bus at about 2 a.m. to Travis, and we got on a stretch DC-8 that went from and it was one class, DC-8. It had nearly 300 people in it, just wall to wall from the front to the back, all GIs, and went from there to Anchorage, Anchorage to Yokota, Yokota to Clark. And that took 24 hours, not counting the time that I had done from MSY to SFO. And then finally landed at Clark, just beat to, you know what, check into the thing. And now we go through jungle survival school for a couple, 10 days, some Siri training, and then catch a 141 into Da Nang late one night. I think it was Halloween night that I landed in at Da Nang.
Wow.
It was bewildering because I got there about midnight, 1 a.m. Somebody from the squadron had come over in a squadron pickup. The MAC terminal was on the north side of the west side of the base, and the fighter squadrons were on the east side of the base. And somebody had come over in a pickup, and grabbed me up, took me back to the queue, to the squadron. Directly behind the squadron, we had 3 squadron buildings: the 421st, the 4th, and the 390th. I was in the 390th, and behind each of the squadrons was a barracks of sort. It was made up of fiberglass panels wedged into aluminum joints at the corners. So you just put things in, you made corners, kind of like an erector set almost. And they created a place to live that we had 2 officers in a room sharing a bath and shower with 2 other officers who lived in the other room. So 4 guys to 1 bath, and a long hallway. And you either slept in there and went to the squadron, and you fallen out of the barracks 25 feet, you were in the squadron. We literally lived in the squadron. The squadron was where we did everything. And then back to go to sleep if you could.
Wow. So what was your first combat mission like?
I was flying with the squadron weapons officer, and it was a nighttime sortie, and it was a flight where C-123 was acting as the spotter and was throwing what we called logs out to mark on the ground, and then saying, okay, I've got 2 green logs on the fire. Take the distance between those 2 green logs, divide it in half, and rotate 90 degrees, and there's your target. And rotate 90 degrees to the north. The line between these two spots on the ground is your reference line and a reference axis. So rotate 90 degrees from that. Half the distance of the distance between the 2 is your target. And so we were doing dumb bomb delivery. So at night we were doing a 30-degree dive angle, 400, 450, I think was the release altitude, release speed. And I believe we tried to drop at about 5,000 or 6,000 feet, so as to bottom out at 4,500 feet. They didn't like us going below 4,500 feet. And we came off that after dropping our 12 Mark 82, excuse me. And we're looking down there and we see fires. And he says, oh, you've got two trucks. And I went, wow, this is simple. This is easy. You go drop bombs and you burn trucks up, only to find out that was really an extraordinary thing. If you figured out how much a Mark 82, a 500-pound bomb cost, in those days, it effectively cost $1 per pound. So we had dropped 12,000 pounds or $12,000 worth of ordnance to kill a truck that was probably worth $3,000 when it was new. And this probably wasn't a brand new. It would have been, and now that was just one airplane. We were in a flight of 2, so double that. And here we are expending this much, and we killed 2. It'd have been cheaper to stand at the border and say, how much you want for your truck? Here's $10,000. You take it from them. But that wasn't.
That's awesome.
That wasn't an option. But yeah, that was a sensational sortie. We killed trucks coming back going, oh man, this is going to be a great war. We go out, we do things, it's like going to a shooting gallery and bing, you knock over a duck, bing, you knock over a duck, bing, hey, you get a Cupid doll. Little to find out that there were lots of sorties where you just dropped and all you did was make matchsticks out of the teak or whatever else was happening there. And you didn't do much but blow trees over a lot, because dropping dumb bombs is quite a science in order to get it right. And when people are shooting at you, you don't have all of the wherewithal to be able to go, okay, I got the angle right, I got the airspeed right, here comes the altitude, the pipper's closing up on the target. Getting all that to occur all at the same time and make the bomb come off and hope it all works right is almost a feat of good grief. How can anybody do this?
Yeah. Well, and so what were you doing? What was your role in the back seat as far as crew coordination during all of this? Like, what was?
Well, during an actual bomb delivery, I was an oral altimeter. We used to call ourselves the $1 million oral altimeter.
So that training.
7, 6, 5, ready, pickle, pull. And if he didn't pull by the time I said my pull, then I was going to pull on a pole. You hardly ever did, but you had to watch it. There was one time late in my year where the guy that I flew with all the time, he just recently passed away, and he's been buried at Arlington. But he was going through pickle altitude, and he says he wasn't, but I say he was. He was inverted. I took the airplane from him and rolled it right side up and pulled up. And he went, I had it okay, but what I did, we lived. I don't know what he would have done and whether we'd have lived or not, because this was different. This was not the normal. So we were also kind of the safety observer, if you will, because his focus is tied into 3 instruments right there. He's looking at airspeed, altitude, and dive angle, and really not paying that much attention to the altitude because I'm giving him that orally. But if it's a new backseater, you're going to watch to make sure that it's not off by a few seconds or the cadence is really right, And then, but that was one of the weird things, because I G'd up the airplane, and the F-4 rolled more with rudder than it did with when it was G'd up. And I remember mashing so hard on the left rudder to get the thing, and it's fully loaded with weapons, to get it to roll level and pulled up. And he said, what was going on? Why'd you take the airplane? And I said, we were inverted. Yeah, okay. And then we just kind of shook it off, went on with the mission, and then came back and did the over the beard, debrief the type thing. And we could never agree that, that he was wrong.
Was it nighttime?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Night spatial D.
I would say until I got into the fast fact mission, that almost all of the sorties, I would say 75% of the sorties that I flew were nighttime missions. There really were a lot of nighttime missions. Wow. And there were times where we would act like we were vampires, and we would rush to get into the building before the sun would come up, simply not to have sunlight touch us. One of the things that was really terrible about flying there was crew rest. And all of the people say, oh, Air Force gives you 12 hours of crew rest with 8 hours of uninterrupted rest, uninterrupted sleep. Well, imagine this. Let's say your first sortie is at 10 o'clock in the morning. So you show up at about 8 o'clock in the morning, go through your briefing, get everything ready, go pre-flight the aircraft, and you take off at 10 o'clock. And since you're in Da Nang and everything is really close to you, your sortie only lasts an hour 0.3, an hour 0.5. So an hour 0.5 is when you land. You go to debrief, you go to intel debrief, you get through all of that. Well, let's say you finish at noon. Okay, you're out of there at noon. The scheduler says you're in crew rest. You're going to fly at midnight. So you start at midnight, you finish at 3 in the morning, you're in crew rest. You're going to fly at 3 in the afternoon. And so you fly at 3 in the afternoon, you finish at 6 o'clock, you're in crew rest. You're going to fly at 6 o'clock. We got 12 hours of crew rest, but it was not used. We used to beg him, give me 2 sorties in a row so at least I have either a day or a night to be in, because working you around the clock, flying you every 14 to 15 hours really is a killer. And I had several months where I flew up to 90 hours. We were limited to fly no more than 90 hours.
90 hours? Oh my God.
Yeah, we would fly a lot. And either that way, we also set air-to-air alert and air-to-surface alert. So there were 6 jets, 3 flights that were an air-to-surface alert. One of them would have snake and nape. One flight would have snake and nape, which is napalm in generally the lead aircraft, and high drag Mark 82s on the number 2's aircraft. And then some of the airplanes would have slicks on them. Some of them would have Mark 82 fuse extenders on them, which are 36-inch long fuses so that they explode slightly above the surface. And when we were sitting air-to-air or air-to-surface alert, those were for 12-hour periods. You clocked in at 6 in the morning and you clocked out at 6 at night, and so on. Or if you flew more than 3 sorties in the day, they would tend to look for somebody to replace you if you did a real true combat turn and you were ready to fly. We would take off within an hour after having landed from one sortie. And you barely get to debrief. You're still sweating from the mission when you climb back in. And that's one of the things about F-4s compared to the modern day airplanes with F-16s and F-15s. The air conditioning system did not work. I mean, so as soon as you got in the cockpit, and if you had to put the canopy down, you started sweating until the airplane was at 300 knots. If it was at less than that, there was just no airflow coming in, and in the hot humidity of the day, it was terrible. The idea that when I first saw an F-16 crank up for the first time and the guy closed his canopy almost immediately, I'm going, what the hell? Is he going to bake himself? Only to find out later on is that they had created air conditioning systems that actually worked in airplanes instead of giving you, oh, well, it pressurizes the cockpit. Well, whether or not it spits snowballs at you or spits water at you or not is irrelevant. It's still pressurizing the cockpit, so you're good to go. So we flew a lot of times, and I noticed you reacted. So in 1 year, of which that year in Vietnam, I ended up taking off 2 weeks for an R&R with my wife in Hawaii. I spent 1 week in Hong Kong, and then I was supposed to go get an airplane from CCK, which is a base in southwestern Taiwan that did our refurbishment on the airplanes. And so we flew a commercial flight into Taipei, and then a train down to CCK to fly it home. But the airplane wasn't ready. So we spent horrors. We had to spend 3 extra days in Taipei. That was just a hard luck tour. So here's 1 month gone. And then of the times that we had malfunctions in the airplane to where either a hit or something like a generator failure or whatever, that I had to land someplace else. So most of the time it was out to Ubon to land in Thailand. I did that 30 times. So that's 30 nights that I wasn't in Da Nang. So effectively, in a 10-month period, I flew 650 combat hours. So you get an idea of the cadence. So you can see where some months were hitting 90 and some months were a little less than that. But back in those days, we flew a lot. We were probably engaged in dropping bombs within 20 minutes after takeoff. And then the sortie was over with. A lot of times my sorties in Vietnam were only 0.9 from Da Nang. But then there was 2 missions that we were involved in. the Spectre, the gunship support, required 3 aircraft launching at 20-minute intervals, and you were airborne for 4.5 hours. That's an interesting mission. Okay, think of this. Da Nang is on the East Coast. Fly west for about 200 miles, and that's where the war zone is. And fly 100 miles further west, and that's where the tanker is. So if you have a 3-ship, but the 3-ship briefs, but is not planned, briefs together, but is never going to fly together, because the first one takes off, and in 20 minutes, he's overhead the gunship. So he's orbiting over the gunship. As the gunship gets shot at, you roll in and drop ordnance where you think the tracers were coming from to drop on. Remember, we're still dropping dumb bombs, and you don't really know the altitude of the target. So bombs are not necessarily more than just get their heads down. But after 20 minutes, you're now bingo for fuel. So the second airplane is just now arriving overhead. And so the first airplane leaves and goes to the tanker. So it takes you a few minutes to get to the tanker, but about 20 minutes to get your gas. And so at the 20-minute point for the second airplane, 40 minutes for the first one, the third airplane is taking off, arrives overhead, dismisses the second guy, and now you just have this rotating cap that goes from the war zone to the tanker and back again to cover a 3 to 4 hour period, 4.5 hour period. And then finally, either when you're, Winchester, no more weapons to drop, or that time is up, then you start cycling every 20 minutes back home to land. And then you end up waiting around for the last guy to land to have a quote debrief. That's an interesting sortie.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily the most effective sortie, but it's an interesting sortie to do from a planning standpoint. And it gets you some time without being too terribly hazardous. But mountains stick up, and you got to know where you are. When I flew Stormy missions, sometimes we would strafe. Not very often, but the Stormy mission was always flown in an E model. And Da Nang was one of the rare F-4s bases, too, that they had determined early on that they preferred, from a maintenance standpoint and from a munition standpoint, to not fly with wing tanks. You almost always see F-4s with 2 wing tanks, and that leaves you with the inboard station and the centerline station to load munitions. And all of the other bases flew them that way. Da Nang flew with a big 300 some odd gallon or 600 gallon centerline tank, and that left the inboard stations and the wing stations, which is so much easier to get to for loading munitions. They thought that they could do a quicker turn. That's why we were able to do that 1 hour combat turn, I think, because you didn't have to go way under the belly of the beast in order to be able to load the six weapons on a centerline station. You could put them on the wing station. So we would carry MERS on each wing station. So we had 6 Mark 82s on each wing, and it left inboard stations for 2 AIM-9s on each station, or something else if they wanted to put something there. But typically we would fly with 12 Mark 82s most of the time, or I think I've got a picture of it back here. It's kind of hard to tell. That F-4 shot, the large picture there, that's got 8 850-pound 850-pound napalm tanks on it. So it would carry 8 napalms.
What was the Stormy mission?
Stormy mission was a fast forward air controller. And so we would fly in areas that were hazardous to the O-1s, the OV-10s, the O-2s. They couldn't survive in it. So we would fly missions there. So that mission was kind of like a bloodhound. We would go fly over a certain area of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that was designated to us, and look at the ground for trucks or POL dumps or simply to look at the roads, which were just big muddy trails, to determine whether or not something had driven over it from the day before, when you had flown over it exactly before, and you flew over it so often, you felt like an Indian looking at trail and say, Kimosabe say so-and-so's passed here in the last 24 hours. You could actually see places. And occasionally we would find somebody who hadn't ducked away quick enough. But so our little motto used to be, when you got a stormy plaque, I'm looking at it right there, more than 50,000 miles at more than 500 knots and less than 500 feet. We would fly low and we'd look under the trees alongside roots. Here's a root structure, and we would just do visual reconnaissance. And then what we were flying with was an E model with a gun, and the only ordnance we had was Willie Pete rockets. And so when we'd find something, we'd pop up, call the ABCCC, which was the Airborne Command Post, say, okay, I've got a target. And they'd say, I've got a couple of fighters for you. Or they didn't. Sometimes they didn't. And they would assign fighters to us. They'd come over. I would read them the 9-line. Front seater would roll in, mark the target with the Willie Pete, and say, hit my smoke, or 50 meters to the north, or you see this, that, and the other thing. You talk their eyes onto it, and they would roll in. And each time they would roll in, we would clear them hot, off target, look back in. Okay, 2, make adjustments, this distance, left, right, forward, and aft. Sometimes we would, because we were always single ship doing this, so occasionally things would happen and we'd lose guy and never know why, because it was just gone, whether he hit the ground. Because when you're flying below 500 feet, I can remember rolling over the top of ridges quite often to 135 degrees inverted, pulling down the backside, because you don't want to balloon up over the top of them, because now you're just a sitting duck to be shot at. So you needed to pull down and hard to follow the backside of that hill ridge line that you went over. And you never went over it at perpendicular to it. You always went over it at an angle, because it kept things going on. And you always move in the airplane. It was probably always had 2 to 4 Gs on the airplane the entire time. And you learned that at 500 feet and at 500 knots or more to look up, put your eyeballs on something, and then just follow it as you went along so you could see. If you just stared straight out the side, it's just a blur. But if you look forward and then track it, and then look forward and track, pretty soon you start seeing things. I mean, I wrote up in my report one time that I saw a guy on a bicycle, and I described the package that was on his handlebars that he was going on, and got a compliment back from somebody who said, now this is the kind of reporting that we want.
It's awesome.
It's just a matter of what happens as you do it. But we would carry an e-board card, and on it would say, here's Route 9, here's Route 8, here's all of the Ho Chi Minh Trail was numbered by us, like we would number a highway system in the United States. Here's Route 66, here's I-95, and we'd come back. And if I said to the guy if I flew in the morning and the next stormy guy was going out flying that afternoon, I said, hey, there's a lot of activity on this route. And we had what we call delta points. These were little numbered points around various places. Most of the time they were either significant geographical things, because we're flying all VFR. I mean, the INS that we had, an INS and an F-4 had 2 waypoints. You could put the waypoint you're going into, and you could dial in the next one after it. And then when you pass that one, if you didn't go in and change it, and then it only drifted, if it was to spec, a half a mile an hour. So for every hour you flew, it would be off by a half a mile. So we were all visual. This was sometimes letting down through the weather in an area, but on a tack-in cut, to know that, okay, I'm in the valley now. And so I can let down between the mountain ranges on a tack-in cut, and then pop below the weather. And okay. And then knowing that as you're flying around, scud running below the deck, looking at things, All right, make sure you got a good head of steam and just light the burners and point the thing straight up. Don't, you're not going to climb out because you're running to the mountain. You just convert into nearly a 90-degree climb until you get above the weather, and then you go to the tanker. Now, Stormy mission was one where we did it. You could only stay low for about 20 minutes doing that because you were in and just barely in the burner or back out of burner most of the time where you're rooting around down there for 20 minutes. Then it was similar to that Spectre or gunship support mission where you'd fly into the combat zone, do this rooting around, pop up, hit the tanker, go back in, hit the tanker twice, gives you three turns in the combat zone, and then you'd come home and you'd end up logging 3 hours or so.
Wow.
3 sweaty hours getting shot at a lot. 21 times. When I tell this to modern aviators, I said, during my year, my 650 combat hours, 21 times I came back with a hole or holes in the airplane. And this was commonplace. They'd open up the radome, and out of the radome would fall a 7.6 or a 14.5 millimeter shell, or we'd find a hole here. I once got stitched with 4 23 millimeter shots that when I landed, the de-arming guys came up, hold spot, go underneath the airplane, come back out, shut it off, only to find out that we had 4 holes in the bottom of the airplane. Well, we didn't know about it because and one of them actually went up and exploded in the intake area. And so it exited off the top sides. Some of it had to go down the engine, but the engines never burped, never told us.
Wow.
We didn't feel it at all.
Wow.
But
That's
the
amazing.
idea of coming back from a sortie with a bullet round in your airplane today is just like, oh my gosh, call out the squad, call out the general. We got a problem. We've had somebody's taken a hit. And then it was just, okay, hey, Chief, can you patch it up before next time? Yep. And it was reported. It was known. It wasn't like we were hiding this.
Wow.
It was different. You knew you were going to get shot. You were getting shot at. I mean, I tell the story sometime about people. You see some of these World War II movies where a guy is rolling in on something and you see these white golf balls coming back at him. Well, that's what it looks like coming over the top of your canopy, but it is a far more exciting thing for you when you see them coming at you and your little pink body as they're going. And I remember on one of the Stormy missions, it was the first time for a new front seater. And I said, we're taking fire, break left. And he broke right. And after the mission was over with and we're sitting at the bar and I'm going, all right, I said we were taking fire and to break left. Why did you break right? He said, well, I had never seen gunfire come at us before. I wanted to see it. And I said, well, did you see it? He said, yeah. And I said, don't ever do that again or we're not flying together again. Because
holy crap.
Because it was coming right over this side and he broke into it. And to watch that kind of stuff happening when it's close to you and the explosions are going off behind you, so you're well within the range of this thing. It's not like things are coming up and going puff, puff, puff underneath you or something like that. They're coming right at you. We used to call it the golden hose. A 23 millimeter, when it shot at night, had this kind of a yellowish tracer to it. And it was so many traces. You've watched that when you've gone out to the yard, if you're playing with your kids and you got the water hose going and the kid starts to run and you move it like this, it looks like the water is serpentine as you're going. That's the way these things would look as they would try to find you at night.
Wow.
And you'd see this serpentine of the golden hose coming out trying to find you. And if it was over there a half a mile or so, then it was pretty. But if it was pretty damn close to you, but now it didn't look like a hose, it looked like white golf balls coming at you. That was when your heartbeat got up a little bit.
Well, did you have a SAM threat or an air-to-air threat as well?
During that time, obviously there was the threat, but did they actually come into being? No. This was November of 70 to November of 71, we were prohibited from flying in North Vietnam, or we could only go in along the border very, very lightly. I think we had 12 to 15 North Vietnamese sorties that we purposely got permission. Okay, we got to go take care of something. And we were worried about SAM launches and stuff when we went up there, but I never saw one. Yeah. Although a lot of us used to wear a little thing that said SA2 flight examiner, but not all of us.
That's awesome. Well, so even though you're in the back seat, did you fly a lot from the back seat?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Quite a bit. Backseat landings are pretty tough from an F4. I mean, you have to look around both sides. You can't just say, okay, I'm the front seaters. You can even shoot rockets from the back seat. The ejection seat handholds, two big rings that are up here to put the face curtain over your head. If you looked over and you used that as your rocket sight, your gun sight, you put that on the target and you would fire a rocket from the back. We did that occasionally when we wanted to expend the ordnance because we didn't want to bring it back. The rockets were getting old, having spent a lot of time. So if they loaded them up, we generally brought back we didn't bring them back simply because, but we would practice that. But landing from the back seat required you to put your head over this side and put your head over that side. And if you couldn't see the runway, it was great because if you could see the runway, it meant you were going to land off of it.
Yeah, you were off-roading.
By hiding the runway in front of you like this, then it was going to be, and you just used peripheral things to help cue you. The VASI lights were off to the side. And because the F4 was the way it was, an E model, as you came in, as it got into ground effect, the tail would tend to cushion a little bit, make the nose go down. So you'd pull back just a little bit so as to keep the nose from going down, and it would kind of cushion in. The D model, you just kind of held what you had. It didn't do that, and you just Navy landed it. And that made it so much easier from the back seat to do typical Navy landing than it was. You just fly AOA until all of a sudden you're not flying anymore. Boom, you're on the ground. But yeah, I got quite a bit of time, refueling time. We would alternate refuelings. The guy that I was teamed with most of the time, we would simply alternate everything, kind of like an airliner does. Okay, this is your leg, this is my leg, this is my landing, this is your landing, this is my refueling, this is your refueling. Obviously, the guy in the front's the guy in charge, and if he sees something, he can take it away from you. But that's like the guy in the left seat in an airliner. It's your landing, but if he doesn't like it, I got the airplane, and you release the airplane.